Anyone who has been around the channel for a while now will probably remember this video I published 2.5 years ago. A quick, off-the-cuff look at how Canada is improving following their 2-0 defeat of the USA at BMO Field, having a beer, wearing my Pacific FC inaugural season kit, which, God, that looks bad on me, doesn't it? No knock on PFC. Consistently the best kits in the CPL, and I won't hear otherwise, but damn it if I can't pull off a V-neck. I'm just not built for it. But anyway, looking back on that lineup for Canada, you could see the pieces that coach John Herdman was trying to put into place. And when you have a result like that one in October of 2019 against the US, a top 2 team in CONCACAF, and that result comes off of the back of what was a disappointing but ultimately very promising 2019 Gold Cup, people started to get behind Canada, or at the very least, there was a buzz that caused them to pay attention. 2.5 years later, and that buzz is a roar that simply cannot be ignored anymore, as Canada have qualified for their first World Cup in 36 years, smashing TV viewership records along the way. I mean, that's not bad for a country that only consists of curlers and hockey players, right? Wrong, actually. Canada is a football nation too, thanks to the men and women that are taking our program to new heights. Don't worry, hockey is still a part of Canada's identity, guys. At risk of, arrest for hate speech, I won't slander hockey here. Not too much. But I'm sure the question is, how? How did this happen? How did Canada go from 94th, the meat of the Gabon and Faroe Island sandwich back in 2018 when coach Jonathan Herdman took over, to where they currently sit with a supreme defensive and scoring record? Football fans have always been here in Canada. With an immigrant population like Canada's, where it's often said that Canada is less of a mosaic and more of a melting pot culturally, there was always going to be love for football. There was always going to be a massive population of football fans. It's just that they were underserved, at least by Canada's sports media. One of the few ways that I remember being able to watch football was thanks to Canadian football broadcasting legend, at least in my opinion, Jerry Dobson, and his Saturday morning program that brought a few English Premier League matches and some analysis in between on a weekly basis. I'd get up in the morning to find my dad watching, get ready for my own match, then come home after my match, eat lunch, and catch the tail end of whatever the final match was, whoever it may be, but it was always English Premier League. On Sundays, TLN, which is like an Italian/Spanish channel here in Canada, I think, they used to have Serie A matches on Sundays back in the day. That was another way that you could catch some football. And of course, Latin Lover. Hey, come on, man. Canadian boys, don't act like you didn't know about Latin Lover back in the day. Anyways, we're off track here. Soccer Saturday with Jerry Dobson was near and dear to the hearts of many football fans, as it was one of the only ways you could catch the sport at a young age. At least I could. Sure, the Canadian national team matches were on now and then, but they were also often relegated to TSN 235 or something, sent to the nether regions of TV that, hey, if you grew up in a family that never went beyond just basic cable like I did, then you'd have a hard time catching any national team football. Plus, with how CONCACAF qualification works and how poor Canada were back in the day, Canada would rarely make it to the Hex, the 6-team final qualification round for CONCACAF, which meant they wouldn't be playing competitive matches for, well, the entirety of the Hex, months at a time, where Canada was playing meaningless friendlies. A good way to get people to forget about the men's national team, unfortunately. So, not only was it hard to catch them on TV, with Canadian broadcasters sooner showing hockey reruns than national team coverage, but they weren't even playing important matches for long stretches of time. But back to my point about football culture always existing in Canada, but not being served at all. When you go through the Canadian national team, you have refugees from Ghana, Haiti, Bosnia and Herzegovina, amongst others. You have the sons of immigrants from Portugal, Colombia, Italy, and every other country, few and far between. Basically, you have a direct reflection of Canada's population in various cultures who have been playing and following football. But football wasn't just underserved in Canada via the media, it wasn't always the popular choice, depending on where you grew up. Where I grew up, in Duncan, British Columbia, giant hockey stick town, shout out to Duncan, but I mean, that tells you all that you need to know. There's literally a record-breaking hockey stick in the town I grew up in. It's massive. Whereas soccer, CVSA, was relegated to just being the cheap sport that people played until they split off to focus more on hockey, rugby, baseball, what have you, where the hockey dudes would then go on to bully the soccer dudes. I'm kidding. Hell, my parents even put us in skating because, I mean, almost everyone learned to skate where we grew up. I mean, I get it. We played on swampy fields that were flooded half the time because the area I grew up in is a temperate rainforest. But it wasn't just the playing conditions, as football still ranks as the #1 team sport for kids. But again, why was there not always good retention as these kids became young teens? Why did they break off? Why is it that so many branch away from football in areas like where I grew up? I strongly believe that part of it comes down to what you saw in the media. If you had to jump through hoops to find football on TV, if you had to go down to your neighbor's house or your uncle's who has that sketchy satellite system with the magic card that gets zapped all the time in order to pirate TV signals just so you can catch a glimpse of a league that isn't the English Premier League or Serie A, I mean, it's not so likely that you're going to think to yourself, yeah, I want to be a football player when I grow up, because you don't see your idols anywhere. Thankfully, the internet has helped in that regard. This can be hard to comprehend for people who live outside of North America sometimes. Football almost felt like an underground movement for those of us that didn't grow up in a metropolitan city in Canada. For those of us who grew up where, more often than not, big sports stores like Sport Check didn't carry any football kits for the most part. Maybe a Liverpool or Manchester United hat or something like that, but for the most part, boutique football stores were the lifeblood of football supporters. They were heaven. I mean, shout out Soccer World in Victoria. The amount of times I went in there just to look around, to see things that I recognized with my interests that I couldn't find anywhere else in the city. But yeah, it was as if our interests barely existed for those of us that grew up in more rural regions. And that's why, one, the football culture was underserved, and two, it took long to grow. You have no idea how overjoyed I was to go to Mexico for the first time, the first trip I ever took when I was 13 years old. And to finally be in a country where football was the thing. Now every time I go to Europe, I feel like I actually have something to talk about with people. Like I'm no longer that weirdo who just doesn't watch hockey. But one thing has been consistent. And it's cool that Canada is kind of unique in that way, that they're sort of one of the few countries, there's a few of them, but where they're one of the few countries where this is the case. The women's program leads the way for the men in a big, big way. This all ties together, trust me. I haven't seen the Canadian men play live before, at least not the senior team. I remember catching the under-20s up against Brazil back in the day. Those were the days of David Edgar as a U20 player. But I have seen the women's national team play on a couple of occasions. I don't fully remember the first time I saw them play, but it was in Victoria, British Columbia at Centennial Stadium to see two icons of the women's program score against Jamaica, Charmaine Hooper and Christine Sinclair. Christine Sinclair is legendary outside of Canada as well, often overlooked, but the point remains, no human has scored more goals at the international level than Christine Sinclair, not even Cristiano Ronaldo. She and Hooper before her are titans within Canada's football program, and luckily for Sinclair, she got to experience it all, from a promising nation to heartbreak at the Olympics to becoming an Olympic champion and the greatest goal scorer of all time at the international level. While the women's program was consistently qualifying for World Cups and the Olympics, the men's program was having a difficult time making it to the final round of qualification for the World Cup. The women's program's early success around the turn of the century saw players like Hooper, Sinclair, Cara Lang, Erin McLeod, Deanna Matheson, Sophie Schmidt, Candice Chapman paved the way for Canada as they really started to impose themselves in the football world in 2012 with that bronze medal. Still pissed about that semifinal against the US, by the way. We'll never forget. Then they got another bronze in 2016, and finally they upgraded to gold in 2020. Again, all the while, the men's program was laboring to find success in CONCACAF, let alone beyond their own continent. Part of Canada's success in the women's program, and this is where it all ties together, is thanks to young Canadian women having icons to look up to, women who were excelling at the international level. The bronze medal in 2012 will have been an inspiration to many who wanted to be part of this women's program that was excelling. They had someone to look up to who had shown that Canada can be a football power in the women's game, and they cashed in on that talent and inspiration with the 2020 gold medal. This is something the men's program had a difficult time with, a lack of success to inspire the young, and caused a lot of questions of, with all the women's success, why can't the men's program catch up? Another reason as to why the women's program was able to capitalize on their talent, an Englishman named John Herdman, who took over as head coach in 2011, and whom the legendary Christine Sinclair had said, quote, "He's the best coach I've ever had." Honestly, for what he's done for the Canada Soccer Association on both the men's and the women's side, John Herdman has to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. immediately. Just get him in there. The coolest thing he's done, well, winning 2 Olympic medals and becoming the first person to guide both a men's and a women's team to the World Cup is cool and all, but all of this pales in comparison to the damn sword he had forged for the men's national team to take with them to every match during this qualification campaign. The one match it wasn't present at, away to Costa Rica, in which it didn't clear customs in time, and Canada ended up losing. Coincidence? Absolutely not. What's a warrior to do in battle without their sword? Come on, man. But in all seriousness, Herdman is an interesting character in the football world. From Consett, near Newcastle in northeast England, he never had a professional career as a player. That's already a point or 3 for the man when it comes to how we see coaches. I kid. There are some great managers that were former players, of course. But Herdman has been a leader all of his life, by the sounds of it, as he told his life story to the Globe and Mail, a Canadian publication. With his father's mental health in major decline, John was a father figure to his brother, Martin, who was 8 years younger than him. With his parents divorcing and his mother turning to drinking, Herdman went to university to study sports science and teaching, while also coaching in Sunderland's academy. He then moved to New Zealand, where he helped develop the entire football revamp, which was a project called Whole of Football. It looked at football from a grassroots developmental level, as Herdman was the director of football development for New Zealand football, and then he became the coach of the national team later on. They were in a tough place at the time, and Herdman managed to guide the New Zealand women's national team to the World Cup, while simultaneously putting the structures in place for New Zealand's football to continue to prosper. That's exactly why Canada brought him along for the women's national team. His ability to completely revamp the structures for the national team with development of talent in mind, while simultaneously guiding the national team, which, as mentioned before, he managed to do with the women, taking them to consecutive bronze medals, something they had never achieved before. Already in the Canadian system, and having coached in women's football for well over a decade by this point, Herdman made the switch to the men's national team in 2018. When Herdman took over the men's program in 2018, Canada was ranked 94th in the world. Previously in 2014, if you want to understand how poorly Canada was doing, they were ranked 122nd. 122nd, and that was just 8 years ago. There was a massive hole to dig Canada out of, but thankfully with Herdman and later Jason Davies taking on the Director of Development role and working alongside Herdman to develop Canada's talent at the youth level, that would bear fruit. By the way, Herdman is not only the head coach of the men's national team, he's also the men's national director, and he's responsible for all age groups from under 14s upward, as stated by Canada Soccer. Following this announcement, Herdman said, quote, "It's a great honor, and I want to thank Canada Soccer for this opportunity to grow and develop the sport in this country through a one country, one system approach." He and Davies, a former player, have certainly identified the talent and developed it accordingly in Canada. Something I've noticed about Herdman is his focus on the mental side of the game. Recently, Alphonso Davies spoke about how Herdman's pep talks ensure the team believes they can beat anybody, how he always knows what to say in order to get them fired up, and that he's ready to run through walls after hearing Herdman speak. He always knows how to lift them. That, and how Herdman has many different ways for Canada to play. Horses for courses. Sometimes a back 3, sometimes back 4, 3-4-3, 3-5-2, 4-4-2, sometimes counterattacking, and sometimes playing on the front foot. Canada is an ambidextrous boxer, thanks to Herdman, and that's something you don't always see when it comes to international teams. Teams that are tactically sound, incredibly unified, and able to hurt you in various ways, as opposed to just a cobbling together of players that are just told to go out and do their best. But back to the mental. Herdman has spoke of the importance of the mental side, saying, quote, "How the mind can really sabotage people, but also how the mind is misunderstood. If you don't understand the brain, you can't understand coaching. It starts and stops with this, and you have to understand how it works." He also spoke while with the women's program of how his job is to, quote, "fuel passion in people so they see a bigger vision of themselves." The bigger vision of the men's national team was to qualify for the 2022 World Cup, as Herdman said upon taking over in 2018. Again, as a reminder to you, Canada was ranked 94th just 4 years earlier. Canada was at their record lowest ranking of 122nd. I'll speak for myself in saying that I didn't pay very close attention to Canada from about 2012 to 2017 after the humiliating 8-1 loss to Honduras in a do-or-die qualification match. Another failed attempt at the World Cup qualification. Canada didn't make it into the Hex, the 16 mini league that decides who makes it to the World Cup, remember? Something they made a habit of, really. So again, another year or so of meaningless friendlies until the next Gold Cup. It made it way too easy for so many people like myself, the children of immigrants, in my case Portuguese, to just tune out from the Canadian team as soon as they were out of contention and follow the team from their parents' nation who was still competing in qualification or in international tournaments. But for me at least, that started to change in 2017. The world started to pay attention to Alphonso Davies. Just 16 at the time, he scored 3 goals at that Gold Cup, winning Young Player of the Tournament and finishing as the joint top scorer. 1 year later, we started to hear more and more about Jonathan David, a young Canadian attacker who was getting opportunities and taking them for KAA Ghent in the Belgian Jupiler Pro League. In that same year, after terrorizing MLS, Davies was signed by Bayern Munich. Stefan Eustáquio, born in Ontario and then moved to Portugal at age 7, commits to Canada 1 year later. At the same time, Tejan Buchanan is selected by New England and begins to grow into the player he is today, a starter for Club Brugge in Belgium. All the while, Kyle Larin has made the journey to Besiktas, scoring goals in Europe as well, and now he's Canada's all-time top scorer. There are so many others to mention. Scott Kennedy has been in Europe for some time now. Liam Miller, Steven Vitória, of course, in Portugal. Junior Hoylett, one of those streets won't forget type players. And the legendary Atiba Hutchinson, who's still a prominent player and captain for Besiktas at the age of 39, having previously played for FC Copenhagen and PSV, amongst others. And of course, there's Milan Borjan, whose career has seen him go to Uruguay, Argentina, Turkey, Bulgaria, and finally settling back in Serbia via Red Star Belgrade, regularly playing in European competitions, and now his sweatpants are in the Canadian Soccer Hall of Fame. The Canadian national team was becoming a nice mix of experienced veterans and incredibly talented youth strung together by a brilliant manager, perhaps the best manager in CONCACAF at this moment, who understands not only the tactical side of football, but the mental side, the man management side, as they like to call it. Herdman knows how to create a unified team, and you see it with the celebrations after every victory, every bench-clearing goal that Canada scores, how they stand and fight for each other on the pitch, how they all look forward to every single international break. It's really, really wild to see, man. Honestly, we always had the 2026 World Cup to look forward to as that guaranteed, we get to see Canada in a World Cup, yay kind of moment. But to go ahead and qualify for 2022, to be there of your own merit, like Herdman said we would, and to do it as the team that finishes top of the CONCACAF standings with the best attack and best defense to boot, becoming the most improved team in the FIFA rankings and scoring more goals than any other national team in 2021. I mean, is this real? I've literally never seen this before. Seeing some of our star players in the Champions League and the Bundesliga win Ligue 1, the Turkish Super League, earn moves to top sides in Portugal and Belgium that play regular Champions League football, become prominent players in MLS. I mean, it's something we're not used to, man. We're really not used to seeing this, but it feels like we should get used to it now. Why? Because Canada is a football nation now. And like Herdman said, the Canadian passport means something. More and more dual nationals are going to choose Canada now, given they are a rising nation, as more and more are scattered across Europe's top leagues. Sure, we'll still lose some dual nationals like Fikayo Tomori, who opted to go with England. He made his choice and we gotta respect it. And before him, the likes of Jonathan de Guzman, Owen Hargreaves, etc. There are those who will feel more of a pull toward their country of birth or that of their parents, as opposed to Canada. And that's fine. But for everyone lost, more will choose to represent Canada because Canada have given so many of these families a home. For example, my avô, that's grandfather in Portuguese. He came to Canada in 1955, I believe, and he was a proud Portuguese living in Victoria with the rest of the Portuguese community that emigrated from the Azores. Every time I would watch a Portugal game with him, the man would cry during the national anthem. He loved Portugal. Like I said, he was proud to be Portuguese, and it literally brought him to tears to see his country do well and to hear the national anthem from his homeland before every game. But during Euro 2008, or maybe the 2006 World Cup, I can't remember exactly, when my cousin asked if he was going to put up a Portuguese flag on his front porch, he said no. He said that he could never put up a Portuguese flag without having a Canadian flag up first, because Canada provided him with an amazing life where his family could prosper and he was a proud Canadian citizen. I imagine there's so many families like this, so many stories like this. Unfortunately, he never got to see Portugal win Euro 2016, and he would have sobbed. But something tells me that watching this Canadian national team succeed would cause him to cry even harder, because he would see himself in all of these players. So many others who left a poor situation in the country of their birth and were able to carve out a life in Canada. Sorry, I just miss him. Part of the reason why more Canadians are rising to prominence is thanks to MLS. Before, it was incredibly difficult for Canadian talent to get opportunities at top competitive leagues, feeling like they had to work extra hard to convince teams abroad to give them a chance because of their passport, as some former players have noted. Now that's changed, and thanks in part to MLS providing opportunities, and on top of that, the creation of the Canadian Premier League is vital for the development of young talent. We're starting to see Canadian talent go from CPL to MLS, and soon, no doubt, to the national team. This is why Canada is successful. First and foremost, the sword, man. That's so badass. No, but for real. Herdman and how he has managed to completely change the mentality of a broken men's program to a unified team that believes in itself, that believes it can go to the Azteca and get a result, that believes it can beat the United States and Mexico, that believes and has succeeded in qualifying for the 2022 World Cup. I mean, Herdman is a big supporter of visualization, and prior to qualifying, he had a fake front page newspaper celebrating Canada's qualification for 2022. A few years later, and a real newspaper came out celebrating just that. In Herdman, Canada has an incredible leader. Mix in the talent that is finally being harnessed and exploited properly, mix in the talent that is finally getting opportunities to develop properly domestically, as well as those getting opportunities abroad. And now you can add a mainstream interest in the game, providing young kids across the country with idols such as Alphonso Davies or Jonathan David to look up to on TV, something my generation didn't have. In fact, against Jamaica, when Canada qualified, just look at these TV ratings, and that's not counting online viewers. Football dunked on hockey and curling. Hell, they even had 600,000 more viewers than the US men's national team's vital qualifier against Panama, which is wild to think of considering the population disparity between the two countries. And so you add all of these factors together, and you can see the direction Canada is building toward. Funnily enough, in 2021, it became more exciting and entertaining to watch Canada as opposed to Portugal for me. There was something that was just so infectious about this team. They weren't fluking their way through results. They were and are a well-drilled team that wasn't just Alphonso Davies plus 10 guys. Hell, Alphonso Davies, an elite talent and a major loss for any team he's not in the lineup for. He didn't even feature in Canada's final 6 qualifiers as he had health issues to overcome, and Canada still managed to finish in first. And as a bonus, we got some incredible Fonzie live streams.
Oh,
This is a collective, not just individuals dragging them over the line. We haven't won anything yet. We have to show respect to the other nations in our confederation who have been at the top for a long, long time. It's great for Canada to have a successful campaign, but now comes the hardest part in anything. Sport, your career, whatever. Maintaining success. But also, the best part is coming. Testing yourself outside of your own confederation, seeing how you stack up to the teams from various continents. Showing that Canada is, in fact, a football country. I appreciate you watching this video that sort of became a mix of personal stories alongside some explanations of how Canada got to this point. But I feel like my own perspective on football in this country is one that's probably shared by so many. I mean, I started this football channel in part because I didn't really have anyone to talk to about the sport I love. But anyway, I really appreciate you watching. Do me a favor and drop a like if you think the Canada sword is badass. And hey, enjoy the football.